Conor McGregor, aka The Notorious, is always one to attract a crowd. With his quick wit and his willingness to fight anybody, he seems to find a way to be on the top of every combat sports fan's must-watch list. But after some legal trouble and a year filled with injury, it may seem like his time in the UFC is coming to a less than climactic end. However, according to a UFC legend, McGregor may be in for one last bout that has the potential to knock our socks off. And in today's video, we are going to be going over who he may be fighting and when we could potentially see this monumental cage match. Stick around because this is going to be one crazy video that you don't want to miss. McGregor's time in the UFC is coming to a close. There was a time in which McGregor was the next up-and-coming fighter, but those times have come and gone. McGregor spent the majority of the past year dealing with a leg injury that he suffered during his last fight with Dustin Poirier in July of 2021. Moreover, he was in some legal trouble due to a dispute surrounding the sale of his whiskey brand Proper 12. However, now that is all said and done, Conor could re-enter the ring anytime he wants to, and it would certainly be in the UFC's best interest to get him back into the ring as fast as possible. However, there is a chance that the next time we see Conor McGregor back in the ring, it is not just another fight, but rather the third and likely the final fight in the trilogy between McGregor and Nate Diaz. Now, I know this sounds impossible, especially when you consider the fact that Diaz has already announced his retirement from the UFC, but a certain former UFC combatant believes that for this fight, both athletes would make a swift return to the UFC. The former UFC legend in question is none other than Chael Sonnen, who recently spoke out about these two warriors clashing for the third time. Sonnen, who is now an analyst for the UFC, was asked about what Diaz is going to do next in light of him starting his own promotion. Sonnen said, "You want to know what Nate Diaz is going to do next? Unknown. Obviously, we have some ideas of what he is going to do next, but his future still has some clouds of mystery surrounding it. Is he just going to start a new promotion, or is he going to try and do some fighting under it as well?" There were initial talks of him doing an exhibition boxing match against Jake Paul, but that has since been stalled. So with such little information, is there any chance that he returns to MMA for one last bout against Conor McGregor? Sonnen seems to think so, as he continued on in his interview by saying, "When I tell you unknown, what I'm trying to say is all options are on the table, but that option is also to return to the UFC and fight Conor McGregor." Some of you are probably thinking that the idea of these two meeting in the octagon once again is a bit extreme, but when you look at all the facts, it adds up, and honestly, it almost seems like his best option at this point. What should Diaz do next? Diaz has a great number of options currently on his plate. He could return to the UFC and tussle with McGregor one last time, he could try his hand at some boxing matches, or he could make a name for himself in the WWE. All of these are valid options, but the one in which he returns to the UFC may be his best one. As we mentioned earlier, and as you all probably know, Diaz is starting his own promotion. If Diaz wanted to go back into the UFC, he could fight under his own promotion, thus giving his promotion some much-needed press. Moreover, if he did this fight and secured a win, the press he would receive would only grow. In addition to this, his return to the UFC to face off against McGregor would most likely be the most watched UFC event in quite some time, if not all time, meaning that Diaz would secure some wild cash with this fight. The last two times these guys squared off, they both went down as two of the best fights in UFC history, and I'm sure that the third one would go right up there. McGregor, especially, finds a way to draw in a crowd with his pre-fight antics and his larger-than-life personality. It is hard for fighting fans to miss anything that he does. Also, Nate Diaz coming out of retirement to fight anybody would be an event that people would want to see. However, due to his skills being in MMA, it would be in his best interest to return to what he knows rather than try his hand at boxing or the WWE. Also, there is one crucial detail that some of you may be overlooking. The first time these two warriors squared off, the tilt went in Diaz's way. But in the second fight, Notorious found a way to get the better of his foe. So a third fight would be a must-watch, not just for the trash talking and the fighting, but for the fate of the trilogy. Whoever won this hypothetical third fight would be the winner between these two fighters, and due to their age and injury history, it would likely be the last time these two ever square off, making the gravity of this bout essentially unmeasurable. It is honestly hard to look at these three options and not want to see Diaz return to the UFC, even if it is just for one last money-fueled bout. But the other options may seem a bit more appealing to Diaz. If Diaz does decide to go to boxing, he would likely only do it if he was facing off against someone like Jake Paul or Floyd Mayweather, because the purse for both of those fights would be insane cash. The fight between Paul and Diaz that was initially proposed had a guaranteed purse of $1 million, which is not something that people often turn down and would be essentially impossible for the UFC to match. Moreover, his odds of getting seriously injured in an exhibition boxing match are significantly lower than his odds of being injured in a UFC match with McGregor, especially when you remember what is at stake. Moreover, does Diaz want to come back to the UFC just to potentially ruin his legacy legacy in the UFC? Diaz's last fight saw him take a big win against Tony Ferguson at UFC 279. How enticing is it to Diaz to come back to the UFC to potentially get his bell rung by McGregor, thus making his last UFC fight a loss that set his record against his most famous rival to 1-2 rather than 1-1? And on top of that, his other most likely option doesn't seem too appealing either, as it would see him take a stab at the WWE. And while that may be a great way to promote his new promotion and to stay in shape, it would see him making much less money and have to be the guy who went from the UFC to the WWE, which is often seen as a step down, both in terms of skill and athleticism. While that may not be necessarily true, it is hard to deny that the WWE is a far cry from the UFC and would be seen as a bit of a blight on Diaz's legacy. So, if you ask me, I would say that his best and most likely option at this point would be to return to the UFC for one last bout against his old foe Conor McGregor in an attempt to win the trilogy and earn some serious cash press in the process. The tension between these two is heavy, but who would come out on top? These two warriors seem to be inching closer and closer to a third and final fight, with the two of them taking their egos to social media to bark at each other. The entire thing started when Conor McGregor posted a tweet mocking Diaz's slapping technique that he often brings out during bouts. The picture was of the two of them during their last fight, in which Diaz is swinging an open hand at him with the caption, "This power slap championships is growing on me." Who doesn't like watching good quality clatters? Ha ha ha. Is it a flip of a coin who gets to go first? How long do they have to recover before they get to throw their counter? Or is it over if they're KO'd? Fascinating. I'm attending one of these 100%. Is this Dana's? Is this madness? Dana, ha ha ha, I'm in. Diaz chose not to respond to the initial tweet, but had to respond to Conor after he said me versus Nate on it for the title, ha ha ha. Maybe that's a title you'd have a better chance of coming close to winning, Nate, you little slapper, ha ha ha. Diaz then came back saying, I already beat you at that game too. If submissions weren't allowed, I knocked you out way faster than Floyd Mayweather did, but it was real, so I choked you better and faster than Khabib Nurmagomedov did. Boom, roasted. The pair seemed to be able to do verbal combat just fine, but if these two actually were going to get back in the octagon and fight again, who would win? Well, for starters, it is hard to look at Conor's injury and the road to recovery and think that he will ever be able to fight at the caliber he did prior to his injury. McGregor is on the wrong side of 30 and suffered a brutal tibia break in his last fight, which will make it difficult for him to ever fight again. Moreover, Diaz does have a huge advantage, as his last fight was in September of 2022, whereas McGregor hasn't fought since 2021. Despite the age difference, I think the distinct time gap between fights and the severity of the injury would make this an easy win for Diaz, and if I were him, I would make the calculated risk to fight McGregor again. But that's just me. We'll have to wait and see what Diaz decides to do, and when he does, we will be the first to let you know. That's all we have for you guys today on the channel. Thank you all so much for tuning in. What do you think Diaz will decide to do? What do you want Diaz to do? If these two were to face off again, who do you think would win? Let us know in the comments section below. Don't forget to leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. We hope you enjoyed the content, and we will see you all in the next video.